The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André and I will be your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to another action-packed episode of the show. And today we talk with Adam Gorham, who is a comic book artist, started off in the indies and then eventually worked his way towards the major labels, including Marvel, Valiant, IDW, and a bunch of others. Great conversation with Adam, obviously a kindred spirit when it comes to art, and has a lot of opinions about comics and about characters in comics and their depiction in media, and we had a great conversation. I was very happy to have him on the show and very excited anytime anyone comes on and I get to have these conversations, because that's what I love about it. As we're nearing our 100th episode, I'm kind of racking my brain to come up with something interesting or different to celebrate 100 episodes of this show. And yeah, I'll let you know when I come up with something. I did have a suggestion, which I kind of liked, from a friend that may circle into that. So we'll have some fun with that and see what comes out of it. But in my day-to-day personal life, I'm getting ready for a dinner theater, which starts this week. It's a very busy time, something that takes several months to prepare as far as rehearsals go. And now we're on the home stretch. The set's built. We just have rehearsals all week. And then opening night on Friday. But before Friday comes Thursday. And Thursday is by far my least favorite part of the dinner theater process. And that is the family night. That's when family members or friends that are unable to come to a regular night or purchase a ticket get to come and watch our dress rehearsal the night before opening night. Generally, this is where relatives of people that are in the play who are teenagers, or rather their adult children with their children who are teenagers, come to watch. And God, I tell you, nothing's more rewarding than acting your heart out on a community dinner theater stage than a bunch of teenagers who look bored as hell and slightly embarrassed to be there. That is generally that is what greets me on family night. I don't have any children. I don't have any friends or relatives that don't normally just come to the actual show, which is much more exciting because there's a bunch of other people there that are ready to laugh and they're drinking, they're eating, and it's a good time. However, the kids are just there to watch their, older family members partake in this event, and their kids don't really want to be there, and it's pretty obvious, and I hate it, but it's what you got to go through to get to the main show, and that's where we're at. So, yeah, it's been an interesting week. I wouldn't call it a good one so far anyway, and I don't want to color the rest of my week negative because of a bad start, but just had a day where everything seemed to go wrong yesterday, and I haven't quite recovered from it, but I'm working on it. Getting excited for the East Coast Comic Expo, which is coming up in June, and me and Adam talk about it a bit in our chat here because he will be there as well. So if you are going to be at the East Coast Comic Expo, be sure to visit Adam, say hi, pick up some of his amazing prints or any of his comics you might have, because he does some beautiful artwork and you don't want to miss it. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in person there. And maybe you, if you're a listener and you're going to be at that event, come by and say hi to me at my table. Should be a good time. Anyway, let's not waste any more time. I do have to be somewhere in a few minutes, so why not just wrap this up and get right into my interview with Marvel, IDW, Valiant comic artist, Adam Gorham.
Hi.
Hey, Adam, how are you?
I'm not bad. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, man, I love your Creature from the Black Lagoon mask.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Is that
Yeah,
do you have a favorite of the Universal Horror Monsters? Is that it?
I've always liked the creature. Out of the Universal monsters, I think it's the movie I've only seen once.
Hmm.
compared to the others, but I've always thought that he was pretty cool. Maybe it's only because I've seen it the once. He's still able to loom large in my mind. I don't know, but the Gill Man's awesome.
I think there's like I'm a graphic artist and dabble in comic stuff too, and I think there's something to do with the design of them. I think like it speaks aesthetically to artists in some way. Because most artists, I know Nick Bradshaw also has a real affinity for him as well.
Yeah.
Because of that. I think Dave does too. David Cutler is a mutual acquaintance, I believe.
Mhm.
So it's pretty funny that I don't know why I feel like just aesthetically he's the coolest looking design wise of all of them. I think a very unique sort of you know way he was depicted in that film.
He's also the one of the Universal monsters that didn't really already have like a lot of, wasn't steeped in a pre-established lore.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like he's the only one that feels truly original amongst like, because werewolves have a mythology, vampires, mummies, all that stuff, but like the lagoon monster feels kind of out of left field, but also
yeah,
does fit right in.
I never thought of that because yeah, I think like there was either books for the Phantom of the Opera or the Invisible Man or Jekyll and Hyde or Frankenstein, Dracula, all that stuff. So yeah, that's a good point. And also like I feel like because of that, he's been a little more open. Like I mean, there's been other movies with fish monsters, but none quite as unique as I guess maybe with the exception of The Shape of Water, which I wouldn't really call a horror movie. But I dearly love that movie as well. So I think taking that design and playing with it is something that's really unique and interesting.
Hmm.
Just watching we see my cats running around. They one of them, the one that just jumped up, is a new one, and she's pretty bold with the old one that was just there. So yeah, they've been in an interesting little dynamic lately, and I'm trying to figure out if it's just playing or they're. I think it's just playing. Anyway,
Do they generally get along?
yeah, the white one that just ran by, he's the one I've had for quite a while, but this little black one here is we just adopted her about a month ago. So
Aw.
yeah, Ripley is her name, and yeah, she my wife's cat passed away in November. Well, it's been our cat, but she had her for about a year when I met her, and
Right.
she yeah, she was old. She was 19, but her name was Presley. She was named when Jen got her, and then when she passed away, and then we had another cat, Klaatu, who you can tell I love old science fiction movies
Yeah.
because I named him after the day the Earth stood still, and
Yeah.
he passed away a couple months ago. So and I was passing by the SPCA and I popped in and this one was there and her name was Presley. So I thought it was kind
Oh,
of fortuitous. We decided
yeah.
to change it to Ripley because of just didn't want to make it too close to the one we lost, but.
Yeah, of
Also,
course.
big Aliens fan. The white one that just ran away is Lebowski. So, as you can tell, my a lot of my interests lean towards the cinematic stuff, which tends to bleed into my cat's names.
Sure.
Cool. So, you're in Toronto. Is that where you're based out of?
Yeah, so I'm in Mississauga, which is just outside of Toronto.
Right on.
We're a suburb. We're a city in our own right, but started out as a suburb. But so I'm like maybe a 30-minute drive
Mhm.
uh, on a good day.
Nice. And did you grow up there, or is this where you ended up?
Yeah, I've been here since I was 2 years old. Before that, I was born in a rural town called Perth here in Ontario,
Hmm.
and it's where all my family is, my relatives, my mom and dad's family. But my dad found work out here and moved us all out to Mississauga when it was a burgeoning city, and I guess it's burgeoned or is still burgeoning. It continues to grow. Um, but yeah, I've been here, I guess, all my life.
Ah, nice. What did your folks do? What's your dad do?
Well, they're both retired now, but my dad worked for he used to work for it's called the Perth Soap Company, and then they became Jergens,
Yeah.
so like the soaps and lotions, and then so that like he worked there for over a quarter century, but it was just one of those corporations that was like getting absorbed and amalgamated with like other corporations.
Mhm.
And so by the time he retired, was like called Cow Brands. And so just a big umbrella So anyhow, and then my mom, she worked in daycare for most of her life. So she did that independently, and then she was working for like Good Life Fitness.
I just came from there. Well, the one in Nova
Oh,
Scotia,
okay.
the one in Nova Scotia, but yeah.
Alrighty. But yeah, so she worked in one of their like child daycare rooms
Oh,
for a
okay.
number of years, and but yeah, so now they're both retired and they have a couple of new puppies that they're smothering with love. Um, but yeah, like as far as anything in relation to what I do, like nothing close.
It's rare, I find, in all these conversations I've had with people, that it's like artist parents lead artist kids. Not that they don't. There's a couple of exceptions. There's a kind of a famous painter named Tom Forstall, and I had his
Mm.
son Frank on the show, who also is a painter. But yeah, it's rare that most stories begin with that. So my parents were crazy artists, and begat me, who's also a crazy artist. So
Hmm.
um, but was comics like, what's your first memory of comics? Was that always something that you loved, or is that something you came to later in life? Or
Um, I mean, I was exposed to comics at a pretty young age through my father. So like a lot of my love for pop culture and through like in all of its various mediums is primarily through my dad. So he was a big book reader. So like his father was a career army guy.
Mhm.
And so he it was one of these situations where he was like the oldest of five brothers and was always moving across Canada. And so spent a lot of his time reading books or comics and stuff like that. So he was big into science fiction. And I don't think his comic reading lasted a very long time. So I think like his touchstones for comics are now like in their I think he was probably reading Batman and Spider-Man and things like that in their in their original 60s, early 70s iterations, right?
That's awesome.
So
It's so crazy to
yeah,
think about that. Like, these people that you're like, if you just held on to one or two of those,
I know.
like it's nobody ever did. But
Nobody
you're like,
nobody took them that
no,
seriously.
exactly.
Um, but like his so for instance, like his memory of Spider-Man is like, the Ditko stuff and like the early 70s stuff um I think Spider-Man and Batman were maybe like the two ones that he had any kind of that he read to any extent.
Mhm.
Because he wasn't a huge comic book reader, but anywho, so I was exposed to a lot of that, and I guess when I showed interest in it, like I had a lot of like storybooks and picture books, and it I think if I showed an interest in it, they would kind of supply it. But we where I grew up, there was a mall near me, and so I started to come I started to find an interest in comics during like the 90s comic bubble.
Oh, nice.
So
It's a good time to get in on it. That's around when I
yeah,
was too,
yeah.
right? We must be a similar age. I'm 37, so
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
38. So
Yeah, so yeah.
yeah, so when I there was a mall across the street from the building where I lived, and they had like a little they're like a newsstand, but comics were so ubiquitous at that point that they carried like a healthy selection of comics. And so I'd go in and I'd like look at them for the most part because I was a kid that didn't have money, but when I would get an allowance or if I was good, I'd get a comic. So I never really I never, I wasn't buying any particular title or anything like that or following it with any kind of regularity. But I would kind of keep up to date on things by like skimming things that were on the shelf, or just like looking at the covers from month to month and following like if I could progressions of story. But where I really kind of uh, got huge into comics and I guess like a bit of comics culture was um, my superintendent had a son who was like a teenager when I was like just in grade school. and he was a huge collector. And so he had an entire room dedicated to like his long and short boxes and stuff like that. And so I'd go over to their place and he would show me like, key issues of this, or would explain current storylines to me. Um, so I learned a lot about, because X-Men was huge at the time, so I learned a lot about what was going on with X-Men in the comics through him, or looking at his copies of Wizard magazines, and we'd spend a little bit of time like drawing on envelopes to send to Wizard. So that's where I got like my comics education, and everything from what storylines were current to how to properly hold a comic if you were in the collector's mindset, what to look for in a comic, like is the spine creased or the edges crisp, that kind of stuff. Um, so that's where I really um that's where I really got into it. And so, it was when you're a kid, you kind of want something that's your own.
Mm.
And so like I say, my dad was all about reading, novels, and I was like, well, this is it's different enough, but that it's mine, but also close enough to the things that my dad was interested in to support it. And
I was
so,
going to say, did your dad still have respect for comics, even though you would, obviously became a well-rounded science fiction novel reader?
yeah, he showed the support, but it was funny because um, as I said, whenever I was like good or whatever, I'd get a comic book. But for uh, one of the earliest books that he bought for me was a Batman the Cult, a graphic novel.
By Jim Starlin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Bernie Wrightson. So, and that book really blew me away. But I think it was a situation where he like, I don't know, like he must not have like
It's a
read.
pretty dark story, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I was thinking about that. I'm like, for a young kid to read that off the get-go, it's actually like there's like murder, like some pretty rough stuff in it. I read it not too long ago, and I remember being surprised about how because it sort of stands out from some of Starlin's other stuff. Like I'm used to, like I obviously found him through his Marvel space work, which is what I deeply love. But I was like, oh, cool, he's writing
Yeah.
Batman, and then I go read this, like, wow, this is drastically different from a lot of the other stuff he's done, which is cool.
Yeah.
I liked it, but
I liked it too, but I probably like I read it when I was like, I mean, before I was 10, I know that.
Yeah.
So like I don't know why he picked that one. I mean, it had a great painted cover, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like also too, like the title is the cult, so it doesn't scream like
Yeah.
child reading material. So I don't know. But
It's funny how that works. Like I read recently, lately in local dollar stores around here, they have all these like Eagle Moss hardcover collections of old DC stories, like these really expensive sort of, and they're like $4 or $5. So I just kind of grab anyone I've never read before. And they had the one, it was from around that time period. I think it was what's his name? I'm blanking on the guy that did most of the Batman stuff around then. But Alan something.
Alan Grant.
Grant, yes, thank you. But he did this story called Batman Prey, or Venom, where it was like the first storyline where the Venom shows up, where Batman fails to save a little girl that drowns. There's a full panel of her face just staring at him under the water as she's dead. And I remember as a kid reading this, I find like I read the one issue when I was a kid, but I never got to get the closure. So now I got this volume and I read the whole thing, and I was like, it's pretty cool. I mean, Batman becomes a drug addict and then has to get clean, which is interesting. But that whole thing with her dying that way always stuck with me and still did. I even remember opening the book right to that panel and going, holy crap, I can finally find out this whole story. But it's some pretty dark stuff, considering it was like a weird time period where kids are reading it, but like people writing it had more adult leanings. So it was kind of like, I guess it was the 80s kind of changed that a bit, but certainly.
Like with Batman, and like I think that like 70s was the time for all of the really big fun adventure stuff.
Yeah.
And then Frank Miller changed all of that.
Yeah, Garth Ennis right behind him. Or not Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison.
So
and Alan Moore, I suppose, with but yeah, and I know I kind of did miss the hairy chested, sword wielding, going on adventures in the desert Batman. That was a fun Batman.
Sure was. I'd like to see that Batman on the screen at some point.
I kind of feel like James Gunn sort of, the way he seems to be tooling his new revised DC cinematic universe, that seems more in tune with the way he's going somewhat. Because I know he's incorporating the Brave and the Bold Batman movie more based on Grant Morrison's run with Batman and Damian, which had a little bit of that funner adventure stuff in it that I'm hoping
Yeah.
will come into the stories. I like to see that in live action. It's like the Batman we haven't gotten yet. Like actually, like I love the deep, broody, dark Batman, but we've had so much of it. I wouldn't mind seeing a fairly tortured, but obviously serviceable Batman that can still live a semi-normal life, like the one from the animated series. That's the Batman in a movie I want to see.
Well, I've said for a few years now, not that it matters, but I remember watching I remember being on an airplane and watching Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and realizing that the Mission Impossible movies had gotten good.
Mhm.
And then I watched it again, and then I watched Fallout, and I realized that that the dynamics that they have on that show or in those films are it's just they're Batman family movies.
Oh, that's a really good idea. I never thought of that. That's a great connection.
Yeah, like Ethan Hunt's character is not a perfect one-to-one, but it's more in line with like the adventurer Batman, as he is to an extent. Like he's there are things that he is tortured about, but he's not brooding. You know what I mean? It's always like his character is the cipher, and it's always the mission, and he's got like this pretty good supporting cast that keeps things. Everybody has like a different flavor to it, but they're all they work in chorus.
It's a great idea. It's like the Morrison's Batman Incorporated. Like if they'd that into a film series, it'd just sort of be him traveling around the world, teaming up with other Batmen, and to save like a crime syndicate. That'd be awesome. Man, I'd totally be down for that.
Yeah, so if you could take like a Mission Impossible story, but can maybe like confine it to Gotham and some surrounding area, which like the Dark Knight did that okay too, where he was in maybe Hong Kong for a scene, and so on and so forth, but all the action was in. Anyway,
that's all right. That's part of the. I enjoy just going off on tangents with people. It's sort of part of the joy of this. So.
But so I've always thought that the Mission Impossible films could be a good template for a Batman family movie. But Tom Cruise just needs to be taller.
Maybe a little younger. I know he still seems to be not aging, but he's also like, I don't know, 60 something now. So, it might be a little nicer to swoop in somebody that's, I don't know who they're going to pick, but it'll be interesting to see whatever the that version. I mean, we still have our dark broody. If you want your Robert Pattinson 90s Batman, you got him. But I just want to see something a little different. Like I kind of like, I just want to see him like fighting Mr. Freeze in like or Clayface, or like just instead of just like a dark psychotic person with some kind of a facial scar or whatever, or I'd rather just see like him fighting superpowered people too, just sort of really get the full Batman experience, kind of like Arkham Asylum or something. Like give me that. I'd much rather that sort of aesthetic. But I mean, I'm generally happy with most comic movies. I just really feel like I'd just like to see that version. We haven't really seen it. Same with Superman. I want to see my bright, happy Superman. I guess we had it in the 70s, or 80s, but I want to get like All-Star Superman. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, I mean that's now I think that All-Star Superman is officially the definition of iconic Superman.
Yeah.
Just did a really terrific job of encapsulating the many dimensions Superman stories and comics have in the 12-issue run. And I got to be honest, I was so let down by like the animated version of that.
Oh yeah,
it was such a bummer.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard unless you're doing like a super long, like an actual series or some kind of a mini series or something. I guess it's hard to condense all that. They should have really done it in several parts like they did with the Dark Knight Returns one or something.
Sure, but even they misunderstood the tone of, so like the impetus of All-Star Superman is that he overloads his cells with solar radiation, so he's more powerful than ever, but his cells are breaking down.
Yeah.
So he's got a terminal situation. And so where the comic decides, like to basically it's a more optimistic, despite that it's a more optimistic take where like Superman is making every day count, and it's
Mhm.
fun and it's glorious. And it shows a lot of just sort of the value that Superman places on life and existence. The animated feature makes it like grim, like a Superman's
Yeah.
dying, and but I think Lex Luthor was voiced by Anthony LaPaglia, and it was just this sort of like brimstone voice, and it
I
was just
forgot about
this.
that. Actually, I always say that version of I used to, and I think my opinion has changed now based on all of the Fast and Furious movies. But I used to, after like Pitch Black, I used to always say that Vin Diesel was my textbook Lex Luthor.
Oh, really?
Well, just because he like I love the one from the animated series because to me and the way that he's depicted in the All Star Superman comic, that's my Luthor. He's like the utmost and like he's the utmost of everything a human can achieve. He's the richest, he's the smartest, he's like shredded, like he's achieved everything that a dude can achieve as a human, but everything he does is overshadowed by a guy who landed here in a rocket ship, and it all comes naturally to him. And that jealousy is what fuels all of it. And they depict it so well when they say to him, like, look, you're going to get your wish. I'm not going to be here anymore. Now you can finally fix humanity, like you always say that you could have done, but I was in your way. So fix it, cure cancer, cure world hunger, cure world peace. But he's so like filled with rage and still so angry. They just spits on the glass and won't answer him. And it's like, to me, it's like that's the perfect, because that's a very human thing to do too, right? Like it's just like, to me, he's like everything that a human can achieve at its top, including being bitter and angry and resentful, and letting that ruin you in any success you could have. So like I just feel like more, and I've always been a huge Morrison fan, but I feel like that story is really just like it boiled Superman down to its core elements and gave us an amazing story that said this you can give to anybody and say this is what Superman should be. And so I want that too in a movie. But I feel like Gunn has a reverence for all that sort of stuff, and I love the Suicide Squad. I think it's one of the best superhero movies ever.
I really
his version,
enjoy it.
it's one of the, like, I don't think a superhero movie, even the Marvel ones, which I love dearly, have ever really moved me to tears as much as the way that one did. Even just I told a friend, I said, whether I expected to have tears in my eyes watching a giant purple starfish attack a city, but the scene where Ratcatcher 2 thinks about her father and how he picked rats because society thought they were garbage and nobody cared for them, but they have a use, they have a benefit, and that's what the Suicide Squad represents. And it's like a real redemption arc, and to me, it really touched me in some way. And I was like, wow, as a filmmaker, he can hit all those notes and really make it count. So, I think we're gonna get more of that, hopefully. Cool. So, so did you start with the superintendent's son leading you through comics? It's funny that there's always not a gatekeeper, but somebody that initiates you into comicdom. Like an older brother, a cousin, a friend, somebody that's like, here are comics, here's the characters. Here, how you go. Like almost every story that I hear when I talk to people is that there's some kind of initiator that gets the ball rolling. So
it exposes you to that world.
what did you gravitate towards the most? Was it Batman or was it Marvel?
I thought I probably X-Men at the time.
Excellent.
It was like one of the biggest comics in the 90s. I was a fan of the animated show. And I kind of realize now that a lot of what I know of the X-Men comes from the cartoon, which surprisingly was
pretty faithful.
Like pretty faithful. Like, they managed to. I mean, they had to jam things or condense things but they did a pretty good job of like reflecting what was being published. You could like with certain details aside, you could pretty much you had a good understanding of what the X-Men were all about. But I did like they were all of the major stuff that was going on in comics I was keeping up with because I was also reading Wizard magazines and they were doing a pretty good job of covering what was current and what had just happened or previewing what was to come. But there weren't many things because I was buying comics for the most part off an allowance, so I wasn't keeping up with anything regularly. Like I'd get a Spawn comic because I thought that Spawn was the new thing, right? And then
for a while.
And then I would get like a polybag issue of Executioner Song, and because it seemed like okay, well let's try and let's try and figure out what this is about. And you know, so that's pretty much how it went. Like I actually didn't have anything with any consistency in my childhood, but and then I would like eventually, you know, as I went through adolescence, I turned away from I didn't stop loving them, but I just my interest went elsewhere, and I didn't really get back into comics until I was like in 10th or 11th grade. And it was really because this was like like early 2001, I think. So like late 2000, early 2001, and I had was going to summer school, and this was like it was a very informative period for me because like I had you know, my first serious girlfriend and I were breaking up that summer, and so I was like, you know, it was like the summer of heartache, and I was going to summer school for math. And so it was, you know, like I was down in the dumps. And so I rediscovered comics because I was just, like, you know, I needed something to cheer me up really. And so my bus route to get to summer school stopped at a mall, and in the mall was a comic shop. And so you know, like I had sometimes a half hour, an hour between bus rides. So I'd go to the comic shop, and then I just wound up picking up what was, you know, what was coming out over the summer. And then also at this time, Marvel was pushing digital comics. So like you could go to marvel.com and you could start reading comics that were, you know, that they were offering, like they had the slideshows and so on. And so and this was also you know, the introduction of the Ultimate Marvel Universe. So, you know, so at that time I was getting into a bunch of stuff, but I remember feeling so terribly blue, and you know, my dad was making a run to the corner store or whatever, and asked if I wanted anything, and I don't know what, I just was like, hey, if they have any comics, could you pick me up one? And so this was like not a regular request from me at this point. So he went and saw so just coincidentally, this corner store had a couple of issues of like X-Men Eve of Destruction, which was like the story arc that was kind of concluding a lot of stuff just before Morrison and Quitely took over X-Men.
Right.
And so, you know, it was like Lionel Francis Yu was drawing it. He's one of my favorite artists, and I think that's actually how I had seen his work before, but I hadn't read like a comic that he drawn. So like I immediately fell in love with his art, and it was like, you know, I had not been keeping up with what was going on in X-Men before this point. So I read one of these issues, and it's like they're making a big deal of the fact that Cyclops is back. I didn't know Cyclops had died or gone away, but now he's back, and he had merged with Apocalypse. So now that he's back, he's also got like this edge to him because he's you know, he's a little bit darker now. Wolverine has this sort of like begrudging respect for him, and you know, they're on Genosha, and Magneto is like rallying the population into starting World War III and so on, and that's what they're there to prevent. And so it's this whole thing, and it seems like it's ramping up to this huge, you know, this huge final confrontation, and then Wolverine, or you know, Professor X and the team shows up, and it deflates. It's sort of like it falls back on the like, all right, Charles, I'm not going to destroy all of humanity this time, but it's, you know, it's not over between you and I, old friend. And Wolverine's like, this is the same stuff that happens all the time. And so he friggin' stabs Magneto in the guts.
Right. I was going to say, I thought Magneto died at the end of that, or in quotes, died to set up Zorn for the later one.
Yeah, he impaled him with his claws. His fate was left unknown. And it was like, oh, you know, okay. And that's how that ended. And then they were touting this big new era in X-Men. It was very exciting. And this is the first time I had seen Frank Quitely's art. And it didn't, you know what I mean? Like I was going from Lionel Francis Yu, which felt very, what, you know, like my last touchstone for X-Men was Jim Lee, right? So this felt very like cut from the same cloth, and it made sense. And then jumping onto new X-Men 114, it was like, it was tonal whiplash, but it worked. Like, it was this special alchemy, and I loved it. And so I was like fully on board with new X-Men. I was the Wolverine origin comic was coming out at the same time too, fully on board for that. Like Richard Eisinov's painted, like painted
gorgeous,
like, over Andy Kubert's pencils was that felt like comics, like at this point in time, like it really did feel like Marvel Comics anyway was getting like a huge refresher, right?
Yeah.
Like they were turning a new corner.
And like a real respect for art more so too. Not that they didn't before, but like it felt like they really put a lot of emphasis on like really beautiful artists and playing with the medium in a way, like combining Kubert with the painting, and like all that stuff was very unique. And
like it really did feel like the times were changing, right? Yeah. And so like and I was so I it also reinvigorated my passion for drawing, which like I never really stopped. So I think I failed to mention that, like, obviously when I was a kid reading comics, I was drawing all the time and drawing what I read and what I was looking at. So but like that kind of, as I got into high school and was interested in other things, that had gone away, or was dormant. And so getting reinvested in comics and seeing all of this new art, it kickstarted something within me. And so it was just an exciting time. So I spent that bummer summer reading what was coming out from Marvel primarily, and then as like new X-Men started up in September, or no, sorry, I'm confusing myself, because new X-Men, when it started, kind of foreshadowed the events of September 11th.
Right. Holy shit, I never even thought of that. Kind of, yeah, because they had the whole thing with Genosha with the Sentinel, or the
Master Mold first flying into Genosha's tower.
I never even thought of that. I always make the allegory because there was that show, The Lone Gunman, the spinoff from the X-Men. And in the first episode, there's this, X-Men, X-Files. The first episode had a whole plot where terrorists try to like take over an airplane and fly it into the Twin Towers. And this is like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years before that happened. So I remember watching it as a kid, and then when that happened, like I didn't put it together right away. I was a big X-Files fan, so it was. But yeah, no, that's true. That is, I never even thought of that. But you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember it because that comparison was made, and it stuck in my mind as being somewhat prescient. But no. So I mean, like 2001 and forward, and I was back reading comics as often as I can, and so I was like really into what they were doing with Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man as well, but X-Men was where my heart was, and then later the Ultimates, and
it's funny how you compare how that series started to where it ended. Like it's like the Ultimate X-Men comics and Spider. I used to buy the Ultimate Marvel magazine that had like the first, like the issues from each of those in each one, so you could get both of them at once. And I think when the Ultimates as well, when they came along, and then the other things, but like it started from like a really cool, like updated version of everything we had before, and then like when they got to Ultimatum, when they started killing everybody off, and it got into this whole thing, and it became such a weird clusterfuck of like strange, like just over the top. I remember, I think it was Ultimates 3 when they started making it overt that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were having an incestual affair, and it was like, oh god, like we're really punching for the moon here.
I remember being, because that's when Jeff Loeb took over the Ultimates.
Yeah.
And
it was a pretty quick drop after that.
It was a weird beast, because like it was Jeff Loeb and Joe Madureira on art. And so I mean, you're going from that to Brian Hitch, like you're going from Brian Hitch to that, and like again, it's that tonal whiplash, but it didn't. I wasn't able to make the jump that time. And,
I don't blame you.
And it was also like even just like the the approach to the story, like there was something about Mark Millar's storytelling in those, like I've read them recently too, and they don't quite hold up. Like there is some cringeworthy stuff in Ultimates 1
Oh
and 2,
yeah, yeah.
but there but the whole approach did feel like it had a cinematic quality to it,
Mm.
and
Oh, and
and
lots of some of it was borrowed from the Marvel movies. Tons of it. I mean, right
yeah,
to Nick Fury to the dropping Hulk out of a helicopter to like in a war zone, like all that sort of stuff, all comes right out of that.
yeah, but
100%.
even the sensibilities, like it did, like like Mark Miller now kind of writes comics as screenplays anyhow,
Oh,
but I think
hundred percent.
this was the beginning of that,
Yeah.
where you didn't feel like you were reading a movie treatment. It felt just sort of like this interesting approach to comics.
Mhm.
So Ultimates 3, it did feel like you were, had lost that, and it now was just comics,
Mhm.
because I think like they're in the Ultimates mansion or whatever, and like Venom jumps through the wall
Yeah.
or something like that,
Yeah.
and it just wacky stuff was going on. But I remember that moment where it they spell it out. Like they don't I don't think they quite say it, but like it becomes clear that yes, Scarlet Witch and
Yeah.
Quicksilver are intimate with each other, and Captain America is shocked to hear this, and I forget which character, but they treated it like Captain America is just this man at a time. Like, oh, Cap, welcome
Everybody
to the
has sex with
20.
their sibling in the future, Cap. Come on.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking like, no,
He's right. Yeah.
I'm with Cap on this one.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's when I knew that Ultimates 3 was not going to be for me.
Yeah.
And then neither was Ultimatum. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Pretty steep decline, I think, after that for my watching anyway. Right around the time that like the X-Men. Well, actually, I like Brian K. Vaughan's run on it when he was running it, but I think whoever took over after him is where I sort of fell off. When he was doing
there's
the Ultimate X-Men, and then there was the Spider-Man. Obviously, Bendis wrote it pretty much the whole way through. So, and I dug
yeah,
that anyway. But
it was Brian Bendis took over Ultimate X-Men for a bit.
right.
I think I can't remember if Brian K. Vaughan did, but I know that Robert Kirkman took over for a little bit.
Yeah,
And
Bond had an interesting run in the middle. I think it was like when they introduced Nightcrawler. He did some Nightcrawler centric stories, and I want to feel like with Colossus as well, but I can't remember the whole. I think it might have only been a 6 or 12 issue run, but
right,
it was good.
I remember Robert Kirkman introduced Cable, and
Right.
I actually, because although I was keeping up with a lot of stuff, I was not following necessarily who the creators were.
Mhm.
So it's not, I didn't, when I wasn't recognizing Robert Kirkman's name and associating it with other things he was doing, right? Um, so it wasn't until later that I was putting all this together, but
Mhm.
I remember thinking like the Ultimate Cable was pretty neat, and but I don't think it followed through, and I think that was sort of like the summary of his run, is that there'd be some neat stuff and none of it stuck the landing or followed through or just kind of, fizzled.
That's the worst about comics is sometimes that happens. Just it doesn't pan out. Whatever the deal falls through, the guy leaves the comic before he can finish it, whatever. But it's always
Well,
the
I
worst.
mean, that's the Jonathan Hickman deal, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, because he did that with, in fact, like Ultimates, like when he took over the Ultimates years later, it was so seriously cool, but he sets up these big status quos, and then sets things in motion, and they're so big that he ends up handing them off to somebody else, and then it never carries through, and it's not really the other person's fault,
Hmm.
right? But
No, they
yeah,
don't
so
have the visual vision that he did for whatever he was planning, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. But anywho, I
yeah.
forget where I'm going with all of this.
No, it's cool. So when it was when you got back into comics and obviously fell back in love with art, was that when you decided you want to do this for a living, or did that come? Or did that
I
come?
kind of not really, like art was the only thing that I was good at. And so when I was in school, I just kind of decided that I would try to do something with art at some point. Nothing else was all that appealing. Like in terms of like a career, um, I didn't really have any other exceptional skill sets. And I mean, like, it's not like I was the best artist in my school. When I look back on it, I know that I wasn't, but like I was always good at drawing. And so in my own mind, I was like a big fish in a little pond. But I now realize that like I wasn't as great as I thought I was. But it was always, people were always telling me that I was good at drawing and I was always encouraged to draw. So the natural conclusion was that eventually I would try and find some application for it. And so, like in terms of like post-secondary education, I there was an art school and an art program that I wanted to get into. Um, but like my problem was that I was, very lazy. Like I loved to draw when it was convenient or when I was, procrastinating from doing something else, right? And so it would be a very long time before I realized that you know, to make a career out of it or a profession or even to just be like very good, it would take a lot of work and dedication. And so I had not, I was a consummate slacker and had not figured out or had just not found the discipline for it. And that, so it would be a few years before I got to be very serious about it. And so I went through high school having a fun time drawing. After high school, I took some time off to work and then, decided to, you know, give art school a try. And so I went to a school here in Oakville called Sheridan College, and they have some very prestigious art programs. So I did a year of that, but I was still a pretty terrible student and didn't advance very far. And so went back to work. And it wasn't until really that I met my current partner. We started dating, and I was like, yeah, I'd like to draw comics, and she was very she had an appreciation for comics and graphic novels and was very supportive of that direction. And so like basically I was talking the talk but had yet to walk the walk, right? And hadn't given any thought, okay, like if I ever wanted to draw comics for a living, what does that path look like? Where do I start? What's the progression, all that? And I hadn't really bothered. And so, she took me to my first comic convention when I was like in my 20s, right? And so there was just, so much stuff that I would say that I'd want to do, but never did any kind of like made any effort to move towards it. And so she really was like holding my hand for a good portion of that. But I went to my first comic convention and got a sense of what the industry looked like. And that's when I started to realize that they were, like I started to get a sense of the people who were making these things because the artists were there at their tables and the writers were there at their tables. And I figured out this guy draws this thing. I love their art and I have a bunch of their comics and this is what they look like. And in some cases,
humanizing it,
in some cases, I could even see that they draw this because they look like that. Like you can see certain things, features in their art, which is very interesting. But that's that was my first step into getting into getting a sense of what the industry looked like as a whole, because I really was just like reading issues here and there and emulating whatever it is I was reading at the time. And so like I started to realize like there's so much more that needs to be done if this is to ever become like a real thing. And so this was at a time when Marvel was still taking mail-in submissions. So I remember drawing like 5 sequential pages on like 8x10 printer paper that I sent in.
Awesome.
Got a very nice rejection letter. Marvel's was one of the more constructive rejection letters that I would receive.
Oh, really? Do most just say no thanks?
most were, well, in some cases, they were like they would come back with like like basically a legal thing, basically saying that like I understand that I've submitted this, and incidentally, if any comic that they put out that might resemble anything that I've submitted is coincidental and so on. Um, but Marvel's I believe was it might have even just been a form letter, but it was a very thoughtfully written form letter. Who and I think from the desk of C.B. Sobolski, who's editor in chief now, but back then was like a talent guy. And so it was sort of like, thanks for submitting. You're not quite there. These are the things we look for in a Marvel artist and things that you should pay attention to. And it was a lot of stuff from like, the Draw Comics, the Marvel Way book. But
I think it's on my shelf right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that stuff, it was true then, it's true now. And so, like it just told me that's, these are, keep at it. Here's what you should look at. And so, yeah, like I was a little discouraged because I really it was one of the few times where I put a lot of effort into pages, because when I would draw, it would be like a character or a scene, but I wasn't drawing sequential pages, and I had a lot to learn, and I had to learn that also some, like, even when even when you try really hard, it doesn't mean that it's going to be great, and so you got to keep trying. And then so as our relationship got more serious, and we were going to be staying together, I was working this like warehouse job that I really hated, and I decided, if I was going to do comics, then like I had done enough like real world full-time work that I felt like I was getting farther and farther away from the things that I said I wanted to do. So I was like, okay, well, when this job ends, because it was contract, I'll just dive into comics and make a serious go of it, put in the work, and take it as far as I can. And so that job ended. I searched comic jobs on things like Monster.com and Craigslist of all places, and I got a hit. So I found a comic job here in Toronto off of Craigslist, and I went from maybe drawing like 8 or so sequential pages in my life to finding a job that demanded 128 sequential pages. And so that's pretty much how I got my start. And so I worked on this indie book, and it's called The Vampire Conspiracy, written and created by a fellow named Mark Morgenstern. It's out there, I believe. And my work does not look very good in it. But it was like probably the best way for me to get into it, because
and to learn. You learn when you like, I find that for my drawing too, it's been the same. Like write a comic and make your own comic, and then you figure out stuff and explore it as you go. So like, it's kind of helpful as a project to have that.
Like I had to get right into it instead of tiptoeing up to it.
Yeah.
Once I was into it, like everything became real, and it was honestly like just life just got faster and faster because I took the job, and then was making the most of that, and then we learned that we were going to have a baby, so I was starting a family, and so the pressure to make this happen it was very real and very intense.
Yeah, 9-month window.
Yeah.
It's like,
and quite literally,
yeah,
when the book was done and it was printed, it was only like a couple of weeks before my child was born. So I had literally a literal and figurative baby on the way.
Yeah.
And then I had a book under my belt, which is in a lot of cases better than a portfolio or a CV. And so I would just hand the book off and to people who might want to give me a job. And I stayed proactive in the Toronto indie scene and made friends and just sort of, climbed my way up into professional work. And
What was the first one of those?
my first professional job was really all thanks to my dear friend Michael Walsh, who's actually he's messaging me on Facebook Messenger right now.
Oh, is he okay?
I can see I'm not reading it. I'll get back to him later.
Quite all right. I appreciate it.
But no, we were both pretty active in the Toronto indie scene, and our mutual acquaintance David Cutler invited me to join a sketch blog, where a group of artists would basically, there'd be a weekly theme or a monthly theme, and everybody would draw something and along with that theme. And it was just a really fun way to make friends. And it was it gave people a reason to draw something new. And it meant I think a decent amount of exposure for all of us. And so there's some super cool people in that sketch group who have all done like fun work, and I think a lot of whom I'm still in contact with or acquaintances with. But Mike and I hit it off, and so we both really responded to each other's work on the sketch blog, and then met for the first time at Toronto Fan Expo one year, and became fast friends. And I would go over to his place and we would draw together, and at the time our respective styles were close enough not to be interchangeable, but they were complementary. So he was I met him just before he and Ed Brisson's book Comeback was coming out.
Right.
I think it was solicited and advertised at that point. So, like it was a new Image book. This is back also when like Image #1s were like, highly speculated upon, because nobody knew what was going to be the next Walking Dead or Invincible at that point. So it was
the golden era too.
Yeah. So it was a book on a lot of people's radars, and they were two, exciting new creators. And so, after Comeback came out and was well received, Mike started getting other opportunities, and he started to get so many opportunities that a couple of times he needed somebody to ink some stuff for him. And that's where I came in, because we were at this point very friendly and, meeting up to draw together and stuff. And we liked each other's art. So like I say, my style complemented his. So when he decided that he could work faster if he had somebody ink a few things, that's he hit me up for that. And he's always been with me very generous that way. So I think initially I did some uncredited background inking on his Secret Avengers stuff. And then he was drawing an issue of Zero, the first issue of Zero at Image, written and created by Alish Cott. And so I did some inking on that. I think I inked some pages. I can't remember if it was just backgrounds. It might have been just backgrounds. But I think he got me credited for that. And so that project got me, on Alish's radar, who later considered me for Zero #12, I think. So that was like my first mainstream project, I guess. And then I wound up inking all of Mike's pencils on an X-Files Ninja Turtles crossover at IDW.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. And but through that
period where they were doing one shots of a bunch of those, or is that the long one?
It was the X-Files, and it might have been more so the Lone Gunman, but it was like the X-Files was meeting all of other
right. Okay, yes, yeah.
So
all the other IDW properties.
Yeah, and they were all being. What was neat about it is that they were all treated as an X-File, so they were being investigated through the lens of either the Lone Gunman or Fox Mulder.
Yeah,
just like it's a neat enough premise.
Oh, for sure.
But
It's so funny that
But
comics can allow that. Like,
yeah,
it's this wonderful little parallel universe where that can fly. Like, you imagine if they did an episode of the series where the turtles actually appeared, and it was like, like random, like it'd be so mind blowingly strange, and the dichotomy would be so crazy to like do that in a live action setting or on a existing TV show. I mean, I guess they did
yeah.
that Cops spinoff, which was kind of fun, or the Cops
In
crossover.
in principle,
But
like the Ninja Turtles as a concept are not that different, say, like from the Fluke Monster,
no,
right?
that's true, and it would be interesting if he skirts it, he never actually sees them, but the
Yeah,
elements of that would be very interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but then yeah, so from there I got I st- you know I would I was in the good graces of the Turtles editor at IDW,
Mhm.
and just sort of kept was making contacts, and then was keeping everybody up to date with my work and my portfolio, and then when I guess once I would reach a certain level of quality, I would be considered for things. And so um my first big assignment was a series of covers for a Ninja Turtles Ghostbusters crossover, and they were all Hot Topic exclusives, and they were really fun covers.
Yeah, those
And
are cool. I remember those.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they were colored by a nice talented guy named Paris Elaine, and so really from there it was just sort of like another step in the ladder. But my those breaks were really thanks to my pal Mike, who will always be grateful to. But that's how I got my foothold working professionally.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, I remember like working in a warehouse yet again, and getting a text from Mike asking if I was busy,
Mhm.
and if I wanted to ink something. And then it wound up being the X-Files Ninja Turtles gig. And that was really the point where I could kind of feel this shift where, like, because it wasn't my first, like I had done Zero, I had either done Zero, the first issue, or whatever. My sense of time is getting a little soft here, but I had like done some like legit work, right?
Mhm.
But this felt like a very real thing. But yeah. So I went from being, a very lazy, unmotivated wannabe artist
You're a
to
prolific, working artist.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome. Well, even just skimming through some of the things you've done, some really cool projects. I mean, the Immortal Hulk stuff must have been fun, and Godzilla must have been a blast too. Um,
dude, yeah. So I mean, like, well, Immortal Hulk, I had like I worked with Al Ewing on Rocket, and then Al would go on to be like a very prolific writer at Marvel, doing
mhm.
all of like the super rad cosmic stuff. And I I remember being, I think, in Seattle, with my Marvel editor at the time, talking about some new stuff, and I was like, "What's this Hulk book like?" And they were like, "Oh, it's interesting. It's like he can only be Hulk at night, which is kind of like what the situation
The
was
original one,
initially."
yeah, yeah.
And they were like, "Yeah, it's going to be weird. We have a good feeling about it." And I was like, "Oh, cool."
I love that
And then
comics can that sentence can make sense in comics. It's gonna be weird. We like it. I
yeah,
mean, it made the Hulk a horror movie, which I thought was great. I'm down for that. It always kind of seemed that way a little bit to me. So
yeah,
yeah,
like
yeah.
he found a tone that really he knew what he was doing. And so yeah, I mean, so I had been reading I started reading it and then just became a huge fan of it. And then when I realized that the series was ending at 45 or 50, I think 50, um I was like, it'd be cool to be a part of this if at all possible. And so I wrote Al out of the blue, just basically laying it out. Like, Al, I love the book. If you can find a spot for me, I'd, you know, I'd be grateful. And he's a very lovely guy, and he, threw my name in the ring, and they found a break for me to draw some pages. It was really, really cool. And it gave me like a neat little sequence with the Sasquatch and on the space station there.
Right.
So I was very happy about that. And then Godzilla is a whole other thing. Godzilla is like was really, really fun because it was something that I just pretty much willed into existence, which has never really happened before. Like we, so, the pandemic happened, and I was doing my best to keep my head above water because I was working on a project when the lockdown happened and everybody got the pencils down notice. And so, a long-term project that I was on vaporized instantly.
Oh,
And
no.
so I was just trying to figure out what to do. And I remember it was like, December, and it was cold, and I had gotten into collecting action figures as a way to stave off insanity. And just I had always had a fondness for Godzilla, but I had not kept up with a lot of stuff. And it's like I hadn't watched a ton of the movies or whatever. But I had decided to get into collecting some of the figures. And so I had this Godzilla figure on my shelf with a figure from Mars Attacks on the shelf. And I looked at the two of them and I was like, what if Godzilla fought Martians? And so I, just got this, my wheels started turning, and I wasn't sure if IDW had the Godzilla license at that point, but I had this idea, and I wrote my editor and I was like, if I wanted to pitch a story with a license that you maybe have, how does somebody do that? And he was like, oh, well, let me tell you. So he kind of gave me this opening, and just it was good timing on my part because IDW had, I guess, either gotten the license back or whatever, they were, or renewed it or whatever, but they were trying to figure out what to do with it. So I had this pitch, and so it was at the same time that they were trying to put some stuff together. So I won't suggest that I had any influence into the Godzilla rival stuff starting off.
Yeah.
It was when I told them my idea for a story, they were like, maybe we can fold this into this. So I had this idea for basically an alien invasion of Earth that Godzilla has to get swept up in, and so on. And so, my idea had to go through some iterations before it made sense for what they wanted to do. But at first it was something that I wanted to write, and they were like, well, we'll only let you write it if you draw it. And I was like, well, I guess I got to draw this thing now.
Hands in the air.
Yeah, because I really wanted to find an opportunity for me to write something. And anyway, so that's how that came about, where it was just like I had this wacky idea and then asked if I could do it, and they were like, yeah, sure. And every step of the way I was like, I'm not sure if I can do this because I've never done it before. But IDW was like super cool about everything. They knew that I was working as a first-time writer. So they gave me a lot of room and a lot of time to get that right. Because I think initially they wanted it to be the first Rivals book, but I was actively working on other things and I didn't have the space to draw it for when they wanted it. So they were kind enough to be like, okay, well, we'll put some other stuff first, which I think wound up like, I think I accidentally screwed somebody there because somebody who maybe should have had more time on there suddenly had to get it done in less time because it needed. So, my apologies, but it wound up being a really fun experience. And then, my kids got involved in it as well. So like the Godzilla comic is something I'm very, very happy and proud of. But yeah, to what you're saying, like I've got a lot of, when I think about it, I do have like a lot of weird credits under my belt.
Well, it's varied, which is cool. I mean, everywhere from a Dune adaptation to Rocket Raccoon book to Bloodshot with Jeff Lemire, which must have been cool to work with. I'm a big fan of his writing. Colin
Yeah,
Donovan.
with that, I mean, I had a friend say that I was like the IP king.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because I mean, like I've in this year, like anytime I show an interest in an IP, I end up working on it. Um, so like I mean, like I've this year I have Star Wars and The Witcher, and then before that it was Godzilla and Dune, and I'm a big Dune guy, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of like all my stuff is like this licensed IP stuff,
That's cool
which
though.
is
You
fun.
found a way to fold your passion or things you enjoy into your work, which is not a lot of people can do that, right? I mean, any writer can't just say I love Dune and I want to write a Dune book and it's just going to happen. So with
Yeah.
comics, it feels like you have a bit of flexibility there, somewhat. I mean, to not necessarily. I mean, there's obviously a lot of channels to run through. I also didn't realize within the Marvel system that I guess it probably depends on the writer or the art, yeah, the writer, but that a writer could have influence in who's doing their book as well. I always kind of figure comics like a showrunner, like the producer of a certain comic was the one who made those decisions. But it's nice that, if you have those connections, they can be not exploited, but used to work with your friends and do cool stuff.
It's strange. Like I started working with Marvel because I think Ed Brisson and I had done the Violent, and again this was like another new Image book that might have had some heat, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that kind of this was at a time where where new Image books again like that past golden age of new Image books. So
I don't know if
people.
that's really over. It seems like a lot of them just everything gets made into a Netflix series now, like almost everything. So it's
Sure, sure.
it's
But I remember there being like maybe I'm a little more disconnected from it, but I just remember like you know a lot of I guess because a lot of them were also friends of mine too, but everybody who was having like a new Image book, there
mm,
was like energy around it,
mm,
and I feel like that we had that with the Violent for a period of time, and so when the Violent ended, Marvel was interested in both Ed and I, and I'd done a crime comic, and they thought I'd be a good fit for this Rocket Raccoon book, which was having like a crime bent to it.
mm.
And I went from that to New Mutants, and then after New Mutants, it was sort of like New Mutants wasn't like behind the scenes. It wasn't uh, like there was a like uh, it was a situation where like we had an idea. It had a more horror approach to it, kind of like a Monster of the Week approach. And then there was a changing of the guard, and Axel Alonso left and as editor in chief, and CB stepped up, and I don't think he particularly cared for the book that we were making because we didn't have the core. Like there was some characters from X Factor on the
Oh,
team.
okay.
It
How
wasn't like a
far was
straight.
this related to when the movie came out?
Well,
Because the
so
movie had a really horror bend to it too, which a lot of people either liked or did not like, depending on who you ask.
so here's the thing. We were the comic, they were timing it with the release of the
Oh, okay,
movie,
that would have made
but
sense.
officially they had nothing to do with each other.
Mm,
And like the plot of the movie in the comic were very different. It was just
mm,
that the only thing they had in common was that it was called The New Mutants and there was going to be horror elements involved.
mm.
Um, but and then the movie never wound up coming out, at
Yeah,
least not for
after
several years.
5 more years or whatever, it took a long time.
Yeah, so we were allowed to be our own thing. I just don't think that it was I just don't think that the new guard cared for it, and it was sort of a difficult book for me to draw for a few reasons. And so like after that experience, like I kind of stopped hearing from Marvel so much. And so now the last few projects that I've gotten with Marvel, oddly enough, have been from people asking for me. And so I don't know if it's a common thing, but it does happen because like I with well, or at least with Immortal Hulk, Al asked if I could come do it, and they were like, sure. Um, I met Jerry Duggan at a convention, and we had a nice time together. And he asked if I wanted to do an issue of Savage Avengers. I said sure. So he asked for me, and that wound up happening, and so on. Like that's just sort of how
That's
these
awesome.
projects. Yeah, and then I think like I just did a couple of issues on Darth Vader, and that came about because um, the artist I think, just wanted Christmas off.
Oh.
And I had posted a drawing of Darth Vader online, and he saw it and was like, "You should ask if you could do some work on the book, and I can take some time off." And then they were like, "Sure." And I had to do some like I had to show Lucasfilm that I could draw likenesses decently enough. But
Yeah,
and so it was again like lately the Marvel work I get is just from people wanting to work with me, which is nice.
that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean that's probably the optimal situation, right? At least that way you can
Yeah,
kind of pick the projects you want to work on.
yeah. But
Awesome. Do you
there's
have
still
any?
like it's still like it's still a strange animal. Like it's like you're never it's like Marvel's a publisher where I never know where I stand with them until I'm working with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
but
such a
it's
big beast now without everything else, right? Like yeah, the days of just drawing a comic and that's it, or you know what I mean, are kind of done. Like
yeah,
you look at people that are writers and artists who've created these characters, and all of a sudden they're in multi-million-dollar movies. But it's like the scale of what you used to create, like back to like when your dad was buying comics and they were just not taken seriously and read and
yeah.
thrown out, to the days now where anything potentially could be the next multi-million-dollar franchise. It's quite a gap, and definitely making for interesting stuff when it comes to comics in general, especially with Marvel because of what they have set in motion, and DC as well, I guess, but
Yeah.
mostly Marvel. But that's awesome. Well, what's next? What's upcoming that you can talk about?
So I've got issues 33 and 34 of Star Wars Darth Vader that I think are both coming out in May, so next month. I've got a graphic novel of The Witcher. It's called The Lesser Evil, and it is an adaptation of one of the short stories. Um, that's coming out from Dark Horse in, I want to say, July.
Nice.
And then I've got uh, some some cover work with Boom, and as well as some work with them on stuff of Nightmares, which I don't think has been announced, and then some other things. But and then potentially some more Godzilla stuff.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome. Fantastic.
yeah, I'm not done.
That's cool. Well, before I let you go, you mentioned that your kids got involved somewhat when you were working on the Godzilla thing. Was that just they're fans as well, or your kid?
Well, so I when I got the assignment, I basically made it my mission to watch every Godzilla movie
Nice.
as research, and
That's a great
uh,
excuse.
yeah, it was a lot of fun, and so they watched most of them with me, and both my daughters like to draw, and so they would draw. I'd be drawing Godzilla, so they would draw it as well,
Awesome.
and as I was thinking out loud about story ideas and writing the script, we'd be driving to, you know, different places in town, and I'd be like, "What do you guys think of this?" And so they would hear everything, and they were very much along for the ride with me, and
Oh, that's lovely.
yeah, it was a really good time, and they were very supportive of me, and like it was just a it was a it I really did feel like it kind of brought me closer to them because my work is such that I'm at my desk a lot,
Mhm.
and there's so much deadlines can kind of force an artist to feel guilty when they do things that aren't drawing.
Mm. Oh, I
And
know. I
so
get that. I get that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like it was one of the few instances where I could, do the work while also spend time with them. And that became very important. And I've gotten, because of that, actually, I've gotten better about like devoting more time to them, and basically maybe to the chagrin of my editors. But if I decide I'm supposed to draw this, but the weather's nice, they want to ride a bike with me, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And
That's good. I mean, you got to find that balance. Otherwise, you'll, find
yeah,
yourself only working and that's it. And that's not much of a way to live. But okay. So if you could suggest one Godzilla movie for the audience to listen to or to watch, what would it be? What's your favorite?
uh,
You got a lot to choose from.
there's a lot to choose from. The very like honestly, if you want a very good Godzilla movie, the first one is probably the only like truly good one.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love them all,
Yeah.
but the first movie was made to be like a movie,
Yeah.
and then the rest are all just various degrees of like fun and zany.
Yeah.
And so for if you're watching it with kids, I highly recommend Son of Godzilla. That was a really good time. King Kong versus Godzilla is it's a little sillier, but is also very fun. Uh, in the out of the 90s area or out of the 90s era, I do really like how absurd Godzilla versus King Ghidorah is. It is just truly nutty. I think it's a lot of fun. And honestly, like the legendary, the Hollywood ones
Yeah.
are pretty are pretty great if you're not going to go with like the traditional Japanese stuff.
Yeah, I like them. I mean, I thought the
I
last
adore
one,
them.
yeah, I like the. I mean, the Godzilla King Kong Godzilla one was the last one I really really liked. But
Yeah,
the previous one was okay. I think the first Godzilla set up really well. The second one threw a lot at you, but I guess that's kind of how those movies generally go.
yeah. They
I like the Final Wars one from like 2001 or something, the one that kind of wrapped up it all for a little while. I think that was the one. Was it 2001 or 3 or 4 somewhere around there? It was sort of Japan's answer to the American one with Matthew Broderick. I thought that one was I thought that was a blast.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
Millennium series, the Millennium stuff is maybe like on my least favorite. There's
Yeah.
like there's fun stuff in there, but it was
I have that Criterion set that they put out for the Showa era that has all of it.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So
It's
also
gorgeous.
Arrow put out a Gamera one that I grabbed as well, which is a hoot. So I think it was their answer to that one. It's like they could get the Gamera property, so they're going to do their own version of that. Yeah, which is fun too. So all those giant monster movies are a blast.
Yeah. I honestly could watch monster movies all day.
Yeah, well, it'd be awesome. I'm very happy to see you be working on Godzilla. So you're in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speak too soon, but that is what the plan is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, no worries. It was fun. It was pleasant chatting with you.
Yeah, and I'll see you at the East Coast Comic Expo. I'll be there as well. So
Yes, you will. So
yeah,
now's probably a good chance for me to say that I'll be at that show.
yeah. Well, I'll help promote it too on my social media stuff. I'll be there selling art in the Artist Alley. So I'll probably catch you around. We have some mutual friends, so I'm sure I'll run into you there somewhere.
Lovely. All right.
Awesome.
Well, I look forward to that.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too. Bye now.
Bye bye. Big thanks to Adam Gorham for being on the show, and big thanks to you for tuning in. I was misspelling his name all the time on social media. I put an E, Goreham, and was politely reminded by former guest and friend of the show, David Cutler, that I was doing that. So I did fix that and in all the subsequent social media postings. And yeah, so if you caught that, sorry. And if you're listening, Adam, I am sorry as well. But I did fix it, so I don't know if that is a cool comfort. Adam is a fan of the animated X-Men show, as we discussed in our talk. And as you know, I do have a sister podcast, the X-Rated X-Men Anime Review Show, in which I and Davin Skellhorn watch episodes of that Fox cartoon and review it. And often we have guests on the show, usually people involved with the show, but sometimes we have guests on that will watch the shows with us and review them, such as David Cutler, former guest of this show, former roommate of mine, and some other people that are connected to us through the United Federation of Podcasts. However, it looks like Adam would like to be in that show as well, so hopefully we'll get to have him on there sometime very soon in the future. So be sure to go tune into that wherever you get your podcasts, and if you dig the nostalgia bend that we're on with that podcast, hopefully you will as well. And if that podcast led you here, thanks for tuning in. It's much appreciated. All right, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another featured interview. I'm not quite sure who that is yet, but as always, I'll let you know on social media. And as we zero in on our 100th episode, we'll be sure to plan something special for you. So thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a wild ride, and I'm glad you're here with me. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.